Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. All right. Today's conversation is going to be with Tammy Adams. How can I best describe her? A problem solver. Somebody who likes to take those problems and twist them around and look at them from every perspective and help individuals solve them. So I'm just going to dive in. Welcome, Tammy. So excited to have you here. Um, I guess my very first question is I always love to know where people are living and where you're tuning in from. And let's start there first. So, where are you tuning in?
I live in Paris, Ontario,
Mm,
which for the listeners, if they don't know, it's about an hour west of Toronto.
yes. Well, and the funny part is every month I take my mother to Mary Maxim's. And I think I'm saying that right to all you people out there who love to knit. So every month we take a trip up there on Tuesday because it's Seniors Day and we get 10% off. And I found this so hilarious. The last time I went, I was standing in line and I was like, well, do I get 10% off? And the lady says, well, you have to be over 50. And I went, I'm 53. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm considered a senior. And I was like mortified. But now every month I go and I get my 10% off. But you're so close to home. It takes us an hour and a half to get there, but it is such a great drive to be able to bond with my mom. And she's been going up there for 40 years. So it's a beautiful city. Uh,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, back in the day, I actually worked from home for Mary Maxim. And
Oh,
you know the sweater kits that they used to
yes.
buy, you know?
Yeah.
I used to wind the wool into those little balls and put
Oh,
them in the kit and make the kit.
that's
Yeah.
that's crazy. First off, how monotonous would that be?
Oh, it was brutal. You did it in front of the TV, like you could set it
Yeah.
up in front of the TV. But then when my daughter became a teenager, I did it for 17 years, if you can
Wow.
believe. And when my daughter became a teenager and was looking for part-time work, she'd been helping me for years. And I said, look, why don't you take it over? So she did it for a few years.
See, and isn't that it's because my mom said it's been there for 40 years. It's one of those businesses that is stable, like stable and our staple that you're always going to. And it's so nice to see that still surviving, especially in today's world, right? Especially in
Yeah.
so dying to know what brings you to the world of grief. What mhm.
Quite a story. Because to this day, I don't go to funerals. I don't go to cemeteries. I'm a grief counselor or whatever you want to call me. But I never do that part of the grieving. But I was always that person that showed up when everyone else left. So
Mhm.
2 weeks after, I'd show up with a meal, or I'd show up with flowers or a conversation. And so I guess that's who I am today. But how did I find myself here? Well, I spent 40 years in the field of self development. You know, I took the courses, I listened to the speakers, and every little step brought me closer to that peace I was looking for. But none of them really got me to where I wanted to be. But like most people, I thought I was fine. I'm
Mhm.
fine. And any energy I had left was to convince you and me that I was fine. And I was working as a coach, and I was part of a team supporting a person who had very complex post traumatic stress. And a
Mhm.
colleague actually said to me, I think you should look into this grief recovery. And I said, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, this is not my comfort zone. And she was a good friend, and she pushed me enough that I called the Institute. And I talked to them. I was on the phone with them for about an hour, and they said, you know, you're already doing it. You
Mhm.
just don't know you are. Now, credit to the Institute. And as a coach, I believe this wholeheartedly. Don't hang your shingle out till you've done your own work.
Yeah.
And remember, I thought to
Yeah.
this point I had done my own work. And then I went through the program myself.
Mm.
I was shocked. I
Yeah.
was shocked at what showed up. Like I wasn't fine at all. And so I did my own work and I healed my own pain. And I went from living my entire life in a state of fight and flight
Hmm.
to a place of inner peace that I never thought I'd find. And, it was the missing piece, not only for me personally, but professionally as well. And I pretty well pushed everything else I was doing to the side. And this has really become what I do now.
Yeah, I can so relate. I remember because I was young when I started. Like I wrote my first book when I was 15, 14, 15. My
Wow.
Yeah. After Rob died, he fell over Niagara Falls Gorge. When I was 14, he was 19. And he slipped going to the washroom. And then 6 months later was suspected of having bone cancer in my leg. And I started writing then as a child, and I'm dyslexic. So a lot of my writing, not very many people understood. And I just remember years and years after that thinking something is wrong with me and always feeling this missing piece. So I remember being on stage once and just saying I was hunting for vitamins, I was exercising, I was eating different, I was dressing different. I don't know how many freaking hairstyles I had, right?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't hear anything, but
Good.
I ended up having so many things that I wanted to switch or change. Like there was that one thing that was missing. And then I remember finding grief and starting to heal myself. And that's when I went, oh my goodness, I'm running. That's what I'm doing. I'm not healing me. I'm running. I'm like, well, if I get my nails done, if I do my hair, if I take this vitamin, I join this gym, I'm going to be a different person. And it was like, you're running from your own pain. And so I can so relate to that because, yeah, I had the experience of the death of my brother, which I knew impacted me, but there were all these other things that were causing me grief that I never recognized as grief. I thought, well, that's not grief because grief is only death, right? Something traumatic has to happen. And so you think, well, I can't be all these other little things, right? So when you dove in, to heal yourself first, which is so true. And every time I take on a new practice, I'm becoming a Reiki master.
I
Um,
am too.
yeah, I went away and all I did was cry. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And they're like, don't worry, don't worry. This is like tear the building down and then we rebuild it. And then I plan on going in for somatics. So really tapping into all of this. I'm absolutely loving it. But it does tear you down that you really have to look at yourself because how do you walk with that other person as an advocate? How do we say, okay, I can help you through this if we haven't healed our own? And our job is to really open their eyes to different perspectives. So we have to be willing to see all angles. Um, so what I would love to dive into is what are some of the myths surrounding grief? Like I'd love to start that conversation off right there and what keeps us stuck in that emotional pain, that rumination process where your brain is just going blah, 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 over and over again.
Yeah. I think, it seems to be the current word, but I think there's so much misinformation around grief that that's one thing that really feeds that. And these myths that you're referring to, I kind of go to six of them.
Hmm.
And we learned them from the people we love and respect because they learned them from people they loved and respect, but none of them are helpful. So
Hmm.
the six are, first of all, we don't feel we have a right to share our feelings.
Hmm.
And then if we do have the courage or we feel comfortable doing that, then we get the message fairly quickly into the grieving process that people are tired of our sad story. So then we start to isolate ourselves. And
Hmm.
the next big one is time heals all wounds. So if you've isolated yourself and now you're waiting for time to make you feel better, well, it's not going to happen because it's, as you know, it's the actions we take that heal our heart. It's not time. Another one is to stay busy. We've kind of already touched on that. Distract, 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 distract. And I think one of the biggest ones we learn as a child is replace the loss.
Mm,
So we have a dog, and let's say our dog gets hit by a car. And so our well-meaning parents trying to console us will say, don't feel bad. So there's the one myth, don't feel bad. We'll get you another dog.
hmm.
So there's the replace the loss. But that experience is never a happy one because they don't want a new dog. They want the old dog and they want the tools to be able to process that.
Hmm.
But what I found doing this work is not only do grievers not have the tools, which keeps them stuck, but those of us in the supporting role, we don't have the tools either
Yeah.
because we've been taught to come at emotional healing intellectually.
Mhm.
And it's not our mind that's broken,
Yeah.
it's our heart.
Yeah.
And our heart is not this complex piece of machinery like our mind is. It's pretty simple. You
Hmm.
hurt my feelings, and then, okay, how do I heal from them?
Yeah. That's so true. And you know, just going with number one, what was number one again?
We don't feel comfortable sharing our thoughts.
Yes, and you mentioned that's where you mentioned it, that we love and admire the people who gave us the tools. And I think that's what happens in traditional or generational. We pass down our tools.
Yeah.
And it's because our mother did it or our father did it, we think we have to do it. We honor this. And just in right now, I'm going to dive to it, people. Political grief. Right now, I believe people are grieving because politically the world is blown up. If you're on either side, it's blown up. And I've had the honor of being with a veteran, and it was heart-wrenching to hear them talk about Hitler and how people came from other countries to our country to settle and hear those stories and now see these people who are in their 90s, like some are 100, and talk about um, hmm, these people who have died for us, to see the way our country is going now and the fighting. Um, the political grief we're feeling is huge on that older generation. That older generation, I've never heard so many stories about war because they were told how you say in your six not to speak about it. So they've never spoke about it. And now when they're close to dying, this is all coming out. And what's happening in our world politically is causing them to recall this horror of a time. And I think, wow. And then with that, working with people such as that, and then moving yourself to teenagers and children, I am not apologizing for crying. It is
Oh,
part
don't.
of grieving. In my head, I really want to say, I'm sorry, I'm crying. But it is these times that our career becomes such a reality in our face because here are these veterans I'm dealing with going, wow, these memories are haunting them. And then they're telling them to the next generation, which is my generation or my children's generation. And we're scared. We're fearful. We're like, wow, like what's coming down the hill here? Like, and so I think that, number one is so important that maybe what we were told wasn't 100% right. And those people do love us. They do care for us, but they only passed down what they knew. We know so much more now. We know so much more. And we know that openly talking about grief and sharing our grief is the only way you're going to head for healing. Trying to cover it up, trying to find another way, it's not going to work. It's there, it's going to be felt. And I'm a firm believer that grief isn't something we get over, it's integrated into who we are. And that's one of my, and in the beginning you had said, I'm not the person who attends funerals or goes to um, graveyards and things like that. I would love to know why. And I love that you said it. just interrupting this podcast for a second to ask you to hit that like button. If you wouldn't mind, because the bigger this community grows, the more people we can help. Together we can grieve and together we can heal. So hit that like if you're listening us on YouTube, if you're seeing us on Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, you name it, however you listen to your podcast. It's only with your support that we can reach more people and this community can grow. It's only together that we grieve and only together that we heal. Back to the podcast.
I think, when this is really revealing in my past history, but when I had all this grief inside of me, where I didn't know it was grief and I was distracting myself and all that sort of thing, I developed a phobia, a
Mm,
really bad phobia, which was attached to all of this. And I remember going to my doctor and saying to him, "What is wrong with me?" Like, I used to be normal. I grew up in a village of 400 people, and it didn't matter who died. You went to the funeral. Like, it was
mm,
like going to church every Sunday.
yeah.
Whoever died, you went to the funeral home. And all of a sudden, that just stopped for me. Like, it just really stopped. And so I went to the doctor and I said, I don't understand what's going on. And he just looked at me and he said, "You can't deal with what's happening with your family. And
Mm,
so you've created a distraction." And Christine, I was so angry at him. I was angry at him for 40 years because I thought he just blew me off, right? He didn't listen. He just blew me off. So now fast forward to me recovering from grief, I realized he nailed it because at the time that the phobias showed up, I had just had a new baby. I had a very difficult labor. I had postpartum, and back in my day, we didn't even
yeah.
talk about it,
Yes, it is.
right? The baby was born, and I just gave him to the nurse and said, "I'm tired."
Yeah.
Like I just, um, my mother had just come back into my life because I'd left home when I was 17.
Mm,
I reconciled with them when I got married 3 years later. That fell apart. I reconciled again 5 years later when I had my first baby because I felt so bad that my parents weren't going to know their grandchild.
mm,
And here I was in the middle of postpartum, difficult labor, trying to adjust to the change of a new baby. And my mom, who I really don't have a supportive relationship with, is back in my life.
wow.
And finally, I said, "I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't do this." And it was right at this time frame that this whole phobia showed itself. Was interesting when my mom stepped out of my life, I bonded with my baby, which
Mm,
I thought was really interesting. But if you want a distraction from not thinking about what you don't want to think about, you adapt to a phobia because it's an irrational fear. You could give me an encyclopedia book full of reasons why I shouldn't fear this, and it didn't matter. Now, fast forward where I am today, I have healed all of those unresolved emotions around the past. But now I think it's just a choice
yeah.
because for so long I didn't. And I know that there's other ways to be supportive.
Hmm.
So now I think it's more a choice where for the better part of my life, it was dictated to by other forces. I don't know. Does that make sense the way
It
I
does. It does because I think now what we're trying to teach our children and the next generation is it is a choice. So now people can die at home. People can die in a funeral home. I've had death doulas on who have done the body, prepped the body themselves. So there's so many options and choices. And I think that we have this rigid belief that we have to go to a funeral, then we have to go to a gravesite. But there are so many ways to walk this path with people. And I often say, in the first 3 weeks of someone dying or 2 weeks, it is you're bombarded by people. And then everybody disappears and you're
yeah.
left with your grief. And it's horrific. You're so alone. You're sitting there going, what the hell do I do now? And that's where I think that that constant has to happen. Friends have to keep going over and you have to get out and meet people. And if everybody just comes at once, then, what do you do after that? And
Well, and most people don't even remember who was there that day anyway.
that's so true. You don't even remember the day. It just goes by and you're completely lost in that. And some of the grief that you touch on, which needs to be spoken about, is the loss of that relationship with a mother. You
Yeah.
know, um, People just don't, as soon as I say grief, they look at death. And I'm like, I don't know how to explain to people death has a finality to it. And it's horrific, absolutely horrific, and changes your direction completely. And then there's this other form of grief, such as the loss of that relationship with a mom, that's haunting, that
Mhm.
is constantly there, constant, and you think you have control over it, and you don't. You think you have this ability. Yes, I'm going to pull her back in because then my daughter or my son has a grandparent and the grandparent, and you think you're doing the right thing, and then you go, this is not the right thing, you know,
No.
and this child needs me. It's mom.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when I went through the journey of healing.
Mhm.
Um, what I really discovered was this whole people pleasing element to my personality, that savior complex. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you just want everybody to be happy. You want to fix everything. You want to support everybody. That need for external validation that I had worth,
Mhm.
all of that stuff just fell away when
Mhm.
I actually dealt with the real pain. And the real pain was, and there's two sides to every story. I wasn't the daughter she wanted. She wasn't the mother I needed.
Yeah.
And just being able to say that out loud and forgive and apologize or whatever action needed to be taken.
Mhm.
Here I am now. My father has since passed away. My mom is still alive. I still choose, because it's back to that choice, I still choose not to have a relationship with her. But now I have nothing but compassion
Mhm.
because I can't imagine the pain that drove her behavior because I saw the pain that drove mine.
Yeah.
And I think for the listeners, what's really important, whether you're, in that heartache part of your journey or you're in the healing part, my kids were raised while I had this phobia. And luckily, it only happened when someone died, right? Like it wasn't all day long. But I really tried to communicate to my children this is my problem. This is my issue. You may have to live with the consequences of this, but this isn't your burden to carry. And I must have sent that message well enough because my son is a firefighter, deals with death on a regular basis. My daughter was a PSW. She also dealt with death. They both go to funerals and always represent me when they go. It's okay, Mom, we'll go. I'll just tell them we're here for you. So I think, yes, there's consequences of living with
Mhm.
various challenges, but as parents, what we have to be really careful of is we're not passing this on to our kids.
Yeah.
We give them an explanation they can understand at whatever age they're at.
Yeah, that's so true. And I did something with my kids where it seems like they want me to make a choice for them. They're young adults now and they come to me and they'll say, "Well, what would you do?" And I say, "I'm not here to make that decision for you. I come from a different generation. So my advice may be completely wrong. So I will tell you what my thoughts are, but you need to realize they come from the 70s and the 80s. Then I really am a firm believer that that inner child was developed. And if you were, when you talk about people pleasing, so many times people that are coming in with grief, they're either extremely angry, but they're still people pleasing. And they're
Yeah.
sad, they're still people pleasing. They're still, and I think it's that in my generation, you just wanted everybody to be happy. And if you grew up in a household where, happy may have not been one of the things that was felt very often, sometimes people think they're there to create that happiness. And it's so I always look at my kids and I say, you have to think for yourself and what your generation thinks. So I'll give you mine, but ultimately it's like you that's got to make this decision because again, I don't want you to believe everything I say. because I'm your mom, but I'm here to help you make a decision. I can add a bit to the pie, but ultimately you have to make that decision. So that's probably why your children are like, "We'll go represent you, mom. No worries."
And
Um,
I think, sorry, I
no,
think the other thing that shows up when I'm working with people is there is a huge generation. So I would say probably I'm gonna step in and say 50 and above, but maybe I'm take backing that up too far. But um, generation after generation raised by parents who were taught this from their parents, but it was more important what the neighbors thought than
yes,
what went on in the house,
yep,
right? So, people, like my age, your age, we didn't have those tools to openly express our emotions because we were told to sit down and shut up and what will the neighbors think? And I didn't want to raise my kids that way. I
yeah,
wanted them to feel comfortable. And it's interesting, we have a 3-year-old grandson now. And the other day he wasn't happy about something. And my husband, who knows all this stuff, he said, now stop crying. And I went, no,
yeah,
he can express how he's feeling. We need to, resolve what's going on, but he has the right to
yeah,
cry. And he said, you're right, he does, and I'm sorry, you
yeah.
know.
And I
But
think,
you can
but
fall back on that old training really quickly if you're not paying attention.
And I think that's what's so great about it when your husband was able to say, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry." Because we're acknowledging this is how we were raised.
Yeah.
And so we're trying our best to switch and change because we realize, and we have to realize too, one of the things we talked about before we started recording was how COVID hit all these kids. And now when I look at my own teenage daughter, she's been through COVID, which, that alone, that's huge for this
Yes.
generation. And now we're having this political grief go on, which is causing fear. So I really feel our teenagers and children, they've been whacked. As much as everybody wants to say, well, this generation doesn't know how to work, this generation, well, they've had the shit scared out of them, right? A pandemic world comes in and just wipes out your whole life and we're all locked up and we're watching our neighbors die. And then we finally get back on our feet and now we have this political thing come through, which is all over the news and media. And it's scaring the crap out of them to the point that, with my job, I'm invited into our school systems and the kids are telling me that our prime minister has resigned. And I'm like, what? And they're like, look. And I'm like, oh my God, now they're watching their phones. And, so it's just there's so much happening and they're consuming it all with technology that we have to realize that even though maybe these children haven't experienced a direct death, they're grieving. They're grieving their graduations from high school. They're grieving their safety. They're grieving the fear of their country being taken over. Like, this is huge. And I think a lot of times we're just ignoring it and filling our brains with other things, which might be overwatching TV, which might be, just picking on one thing about those kids and saying, well, they don't know how to work, instead of saying, hey, maybe we need to have a conversation about a pandemic that we all just survived. And I think because people don't know how to have that conversation, they don't have it. Where I know myself and yourself as a recovery specialist, I'm sure has all those tools that, I have talking glasses, I have pinwheels, I have dolls, and we use those to talk. And it really does help because sometimes just sitting and talking doesn't work, but being able to express like this is what we went through as a world and it's affecting us. Um, yeah, it's huge.
It was interesting. I hit my wall about 18 months in. And
Mhm.
one night I just had a meltdown. I just, my husband, was something bothering you,
Yeah.
you know? And I did the grief recovery method on the pandemic. And I was shocked at what showed up. I was shocked at how many positive things came out of it. I was really surprised. But I was even more surprised at getting to the root of what my trigger was.
Mm,
And the root of what my trigger was for the first time in my life, we were being told by the TV, by politicians, by our families, you can't talk about this unless you agree with me.
yeah. So
And I spend my career encouraging people to share their emotions, to share their thoughts, and that sort of thing. And I mean, I'm an extrovert. I problem solve by communicating. I'll talk to six people and then I'll make my decision.
yeah,
And so, this inability to have a conversation with your friends, with your neighbor, with your family, um, I don't think people have any idea the impact of that because that's how we understand and process our world. We
yeah,
talk about it. And I've disagreed with people my whole life, but it hasn't cost me my family. It hasn't cost me my friends,
yeah,
my job, whatever the consequences of that were, but not to be able to engage with someone who had a different perspective than I did almost shut me down until I grieved the loss of that communication. And then I was able to step back into life without my emotions running the show. I don't think people realize the impact just that one thing had on all of us.
yeah. And I feel the parallel with this political grief now.
Yes,
And ironically, the same people in power. But it is, I feel that now where if we're going to talk about it, we better make sure who's in the room. Like we go to a diner every Thursday with my parents and, everybody's talking about it. And it's kind of nice that they're all talking about it, but it does parallel to COVID where you feel like you have no choice. Like there's nothing you can do, and that instills so much fear within us. And it kind of leads me into my next question that I want to talk about is unresolved emotions, because I kind of feel like when I was talking earlier about the veteran people that I was working with, what I found was they were carrying all this weight of the war and unresolved things they'd seen, and they have never spoke about them. A lot of them say, well, I wouldn't want to burden my loved ones about it. There's nothing I can do about it now. Why would I want to speak about it? But here, what's happening, I'm giving myself goosebumps because
me too.
what's happening now in the world has unearthed, it's uprooted all these people's memories, and
Yeah.
here they sit, on their deathbeds, close to dying, and they're remembering their life in the war and going, holy, right? It's so unresolved emotions when we don't address them. What is, what happens then?
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment. So my dirty moment would be I still have this really bad habit of trying to get ahead of the day, get ahead of the event, get ahead. And it's a survival technique that I have from childhood, right? If you can control everything, then you're safe, which of course is an illusion. It's not true at all. But the technique that I have learned, which works so well, is I will say to myself when I see my mind starting to go, I'll say, I don't know. And the long form of that is speaking to my mind and saying, we have no idea what today is going to bring. We have no idea what's going to happen. And after a few times of just saying, I don't know, my mind now goes, oh, yeah, you're right. And it just stops. It's amazing. And I was going to this training once in Mississauga, and I had to drive, and I didn't know where I was going or what the building was like or who was in the class, all those things. And I started down the highway, and my mind started going, and I went, I don't know. And instantly it stopped. And I got there fine. The building was great. I knew half the people in the class, and the teacher was awesome. Right? But we want to create that fear. We want to create that fear and overthink. So that's my technique. I don't know. Well, and I think, it starts off small. It really starts off small. You might not be hungry, your sleep patterns might get disrupted. You're riding this roller coaster of emotions. You might have surges of energy, you might have decreases in energy. That's the beginning.
Hmm.
And your body is really just begging you to resolve what's happened because our bodies are designed to complete the grieving experience. It's normal,
Yeah.
it's natural. We're supposed to complete the experience, but we don't because, the six myths and we, do what we're taught and we bury it. And so, because our body wants to heal, it starts turning up the volume
Mm.
and it starts turning up the volume. And for me, that was the phobia. Like that literally brought my life to a standstill.
Mhm.
And it was like, if you're not going to listen, we're going to make this so uncomfortable for you. You're going to have to face this, right? But then it can eventually manifest in physical symptoms.
Yeah.
And so the price of unresolved emotions, we don't talk about it. So people don't understand that, it consumes every part of our waking day and for something that was normal and natural. And one of the things I say to my clients is if grieving is normal and natural, then what you feel and what I feel must be normal and natural.
Mhm.
It's society that tells us what we're going through is unnatural and we need to just bury that and the consequences of burying. I'm living proof of the consequences. I thought I was fine till I hit grief recovery and it was like, oh my goodness, I'm not fine. I'm a mess, right? But oh, the peace I have found, I just wish people could understand that facing this is not near as hard as their mind is telling them it is, because your mind wants the status quo, but your heart wants to heal. So you've got this internal battle going on, and we're so disconnected from our own bodies
Yeah.
that it's easy to just listen to the chatter that's going on around us. And I think the biggest thing in all of this, you kind of mentioned it, you turn on the television, you turn on the radio, you pick up a newspaper, you go on social media. It's fear, 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 fear. And nothing will shut us down more cognitively or otherwise
Mhm.
than fear.
Yeah.
Fear is our worst enemy.
Yeah. And it's truly you fear what you don't know.
You
And
do.
we didn't know anything in COVID. We don't know anything about politically what's going on. We think we do. We're being
Yes.
fed what we're being fed. Um, and when you speak about manifesting in the body, when I went back to university, I studied the effects of grief on the body because I had osteomyelitis, which was a rare bone infection, usually found in elderly people. And
Okay.
so it's quite often found. And when they found that, the doctor came out and he said to me, if you don't talk about what's killing you inside emotionally, you're going to physically kill your own body.
Yes.
And so I've had people come in that have had autoimmune diseases and things like this and go, I don't understand why I'm sick, and then there's all these unresolved emotions. And, they go back to that inner child when we were like 9 and where all these beliefs come from. And it's having the ability to walk through that and see it. And, knowing that you can walk the path like I think everybody thinks they have to dive so far down and they have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars at a psychologist and those people are great. I support and love that. But and counseling and things. But you do want to intertwine all these services. But where the real work comes is that conversation with yourself, that conversation with yourself and able to take all the help that is offered to you around you. And even walking the path with a coach like yourself or myself. And we're capable of tapping into, like, maybe we want to do a session with a psychotherapist, or maybe we want to try out Reiki or something. And it's really just walking the path with somebody. But they will physically manifest in your body.
They
And
will.
and it's been proven over and over again. I think the other thing that society does is this is my biggest beef, and I know you all hear me say it when I can, is that unfortunately the labor laws give you, I think it's a day or two to grieve.
Yeah,
And that just makes me wild. And so it has been a mission of mine that we need at least a week to be able to grieve. Um, so this is something, and that alone is stating to someone who's grieving what it should be like. You should be able to get over this in a day or
get
two.
over it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And and with you with 30 years in the field of education, you know, I think you're a logical thinker, I would assume. And tapping into that grief and those emotions, that must have been a perception change for you. Um,
it was. Yeah, because I had been taught like everybody else to deal with this intellectually, right?
yeah,
And the intellect doesn't factor into emotional healing at all. It really just gets in the way because it wants to understand, it wants to analyze, it wants to judge, it wants to get to the why did you do that? Doesn't matter why. They
yeah,
did it. Let's just heal it.
yeah,
And as soon as you do, you take back any power that you either gave away or you felt was taken from you. And I think that's my new biggest message is, you may not have been responsible for what happened to you, but
mhm,
you're 100% responsible for owning your own healing because no one can do that for you. You and I can guide them. We can provide them a safe place. We can give them the tools,
yeah,
but they have to do the work.
yeah,
And I think that was the other benefit for me. You know, I remember asking myself a really hard question one day, like, why do you keep telling the story about you and your mom? That was a
mhm,
hard question. And
yeah,
the answer was even harder because then people felt sorry for me,
mm,
right? Oh, it must be so hard. And that whole victim mentality is something that society really
yeah,
massages into all of us. It's someone else's fault. You're like this. It's someone else's responsibility to take care of you. That came out in the pandemic. You are not capable of looking after yourself. And so, therefore, we will take care of you. We'll tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it. We'll tell you where to shop. We'll tell you who you can visit, how many people you can have at your home. And so, I think another great benefit that came for me personally from doing this work is I stepped away from that victim mentality. I didn't even know I was in it till
yeah,
I did the healing. But it's like, today, would I like you to like me? Of course, I'd like you to like me. But if you don't, I'm okay with that.
yeah,
Not everybody likes everyone. And if you had told me that I would be okay with somebody not liking me or not validating my worth, I would have told you were nuts, right? Well, no. But it is such an incredible place to be when you take ownership of your own life. You
yeah.
take ownership of the direction of that life. You take ownership of the healing, the mending, whatever word you want to use. The freedom that comes from that is indescribable.
A lot of times people say, why did you open a whole corporation after my brother's name was Robert? And, uh, and, in the beginning I wondered, but I had written Where's Robert? And
Yes.
over, I think it was 8 or 6,000 aided at 9/11 terrorist attacks back in 2001. And I said to them, I wrote the book to heal myself. And I opened a publishing company geared to helping people through life's challenges. And the reason I did was when I faced my grief, ultimately that book came out of it. But when I was able to open the blue suitcase that was hiding under my bed for years with this book in it, that's when I realized this is the path to happiness. As crazy as that sounds, the path to happiness was walking towards the darkness. And as soon as I opened the suitcase and I walked that path, which was horribly hard, um, I I did find the courage to face the past and look at it all. And I felt like I opened the top of a bottle. And now as I age, now 25 years into this and written, I think 6 or 7 books and created products and stuff for the grieving, it's an ongoing process. I still have the top of the jar open. I'm still slowly processing things as they come out. And they could be from yesterday, they could be work related, they could be from my childhood. And then there's times that I can slowly, and I see the jar, just slowly put the lid on and go, now I want to take a vacation, or I need to focus on this right now. And for me, that jar mentality helps me because I know that I haven't disregarded my emotions. I've said, I need to come back to you when I have that time to have that conversation with myself. And so facing our past, I think, is by far the best thing an individual can do. Obviously, under the care of somebody else, if it is excruciatingly and traumatic. A lot of people in addictions, when I started to work in that world, a lot of those addictions started right from grief. And
Right.
I found that so fascinating when I was starting to see it on reality TV, where we were watching all of this and they always talked about grief, but no one ever talked about it as how do you help yourself with grief? Everybody
No.
went, oh, you're grieving, so now you do this. So we'll tell you how not to do that. Why don't we
Yeah.
go back to the grieving part and say, you're grieving? Let's have that conversation. Let's figure out how we walk you through the grief and you adapt to the grief. And that's what I think we need to do for that next generation. And that's exactly what Grief Uprooted is here to do. Educate these people and go, look it, we're making it a conversation now. It needs to be
Yeah.
talked about and it needs to be brought up. So,
It needs
you
to
know,
be normal as happy stuff.
exactly. And I think that people can't see that happy. Like, really, when you've had the ability to love somebody so unconditionally and then they've died, grief is the opposite of love. So often I wish my brother was part of my life, but I realize, and since then have lost so many people in my world, that I had the ability to love these people to the depths that upon their death, my life was destroyed. But I built myself back. I slowly started to walk towards resilience. I was able to walk towards resilience and look at the people that are younger than me and say, I can educate you with this. I can carry you. And I think that's what we're here to do. We're here to
Um,
educate, carry them on.
it's funny, when I first got certified, my husband and I would watch TV and I'd go, that's grief. That's grief. And one night he says to me, not everything's grief. I thought, oh, when you learn something
Yeah.
new, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, maybe I'm being too zealous. And then about a year and a half later, he came to me and he said, I want what you have,
Mhm.
that I want that peace. And so he went through the program. And now when we're watching TV, he's the first person in the room to say, that's unresolved grief, right? Because every story, every play, every TV show, every movie, like it's all driven
Yeah.
by unresolved emotions. It's not something we can lock away and never deal with. We can't because it's part of the human experience,
Yeah.
you know, experiencing these emotions.
And when you do lock them away, you turn into exactly what we're seeing, these crazy political parties doing things that are not humane.
And
And
not being able to see what's happening around us.
uh,
That's the part of it that really shocks me is okay, it doesn't matter what side you're on, but aren't you seeing what's happening on your side?
yep,
Because
the empathy and the compassion are not there.
they're
And,
not there.
and that's
No,
when you start to go, what happened in your life to make you have to be this type of person? And there's blinders on. There's just blinders, and it's as witnessing it, it's very sad, but it's also very, very scary. And coming from somebody who's worked in world tragedies for over 20 years, um, never say never. You know, it's
exactly.
it's
And I think if we don't pay attention, as you probably have seen in the work that you do, it just keeps repeating.
Yeah, it
Here
does.
we go again. We're doing it again, and it's the same playbook, it's the same
Yes.
script, it's the same strategy, and until we see it for what it is, and the only way you can is to get the emotion out of the way.
Yeah.
Because if we're driven by emotion, I put a thing up on Facebook yesterday. It was a German Shepherd jumping off a cliff as he attacked an eagle. Of course, the eagle's in the air, right? And I think the caption was, decisions made in anger can't be taken back,
Ah, so true. So
right? Because he's so angry at the eagle, he jumps right off the cliff. The eagle's not going to fall. He's got wings.
Yep, this is so true, so true. Well, I have to thank you so much for joining us and really walking us through this path of why we would want to really look at our emotions and how to kind of go about that. If people wanted to reach out to you, what would be their best email, Facebook? What are we on Facebook?
Yeah, on Facebook, they can find me under Tammy Adams or Intuitive Understanding. My email is tdadams@rogers.com, and my website is tadams.ca. And what I'd really like to stress to the viewers is my website's not a marketing website.
Mm,
It's full of resources. And please go help yourself.
yeah.
There's blogs, there's ebooks, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of stuff there. Just go help yourself. That's what it's there for.
Well, and people are not brought to grief and in this industry for money. It's not a
No,
career people choose. I often say grief chooses you. And it's so evident in yourself and how you speak that this was a choice for you, that you wanted to choose to heal. And you saw in that healing that you had that ability to heal others. And so did your husband. So that's pretty amazing. That's awesome. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. As usual, it is only together that we grieve and is only together that we heal. Take care, everybody. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.